Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 17 quarterback starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about news around the National Football League, then going into the matchups at the quarterback position for Week 17, and then closing off today's video with my top 16 quarterback rankings. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Just because it's Week 17 and fantasy football ends this week, that does not mean content stops on the channel. We will be going strong through 2020 all the way until next season, so content will be coming out. So click the bell notification button to be notified when my latest content is out. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Goodness gracious. Hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. All right, so we're talking about the quarterback position, but before we begin, let's talk about some news around the National Football League. As it currently stands, again, there isn't much news to pretty much talk about, but I'm just going to look at a couple of the headlines as it currently stands. James Conner, probably not going to play this week. Zach Ertz, very much so in question. Outside of that, Steelers send Mason Rudolph to the IR. Marshawn Lynch, we've already talked about. Ryan Turbin, we already talked about. J.J. Watt's coming back from injured reserve. Kyler Murray's probably going to... I don't know if they're going to play him. That's how thin it is as of right now. Everything in terms of news, fairly just average. That's what you get when you get into Week 17. It's unfortunate, but that's the case. Everything is really bare bones. Nobody's really talking. Only the teams that are making playoffs are really getting any moves done or doing anything in that nature or keeping their players out in order to make sure that they're healthy. There are teams that are 100%. Yeah, like let's say, for example, the Buffalo Bills. They're pretty much locked at where they're going to play. They're not going to win their division, and they're going to play a wild card matchup, and it's going to be a one-way game. Yet, they somehow still want to play all their starters this week, unless something changes within the next 24 hours, which it definitely could, and that's why rankings are subject to change. As it currently stands, we don't know exactly what they're doing. We're kind of expecting them to probably play their guys, but we'll see where it happens. We'll see what Doug McDermott kind of decides to do with his offense and his defense going into this week. But regardless, very, very little news around the National Football League in terms of fantasy football. So let's go ahead and let's talk about matchups. Let's get right to the bread and butter of the episode. And let's talk about who gives up the most points to opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis. On average, 6 point per passing touchdown formats. It's the Arizona Cardinals. They get to take on the Los Angeles Rams. Like I talked about earlier this week, if Jared Goff's good to go, again, he has thrown 2+ touchdowns each of the last 3 weeks. The last time he played against the Arizona Cardinals, almost broke 30 points in a 6 point per passing touchdown format. Played very well against them, and the offense has been far better in the last 5 weeks in comparison to what they were able to produce, for majority of the season, for 75% of the season. It's promising, and at least Jared Goff has a very good matchup at home this week on hand. Moving on to Miami Dolphins, we know Tom Brady will be perfectly fine against them. They will run the ball, but there will be an opportunity for Tom Brady to potentially throw a couple touchdowns early in the game, mount a lead, and then go ahead and run the clock out for the second half. But I do expect the potential of Tom Brady potentially even sitting for majority of the fourth quarter in this game. Again, they want to lock down the win, get the bye week, and be done. Moving on, they have the Oakland Raiders are the number 3. Drew Lock, again, even though he's had easier matchups, he really hasn't been as good as he was against that Houston Texans defense a couple weeks back. Hopefully this week he can have another good week here for the Denver Broncos. But again, there's always opportunity or potential where the Oakland Raiders defense steps up and gives this young quarterback some problems. They send some pressure at him, they blitz him, make him uncomfortable. They could go ahead and force some issues in that offense. Moving on to New York Giants, again, Carson Wentz been a really good quarterback in the last couple weeks. Obviously, he's made a lot of comebacks late in games, but again, this will be a pretty easy matchup straight away from the get-go for him to establish himself. Again, they're still dealing with a lot of injuries in this offense. Zach Ertz, Lane Johnson, the right tackles, still dealing with that ankle injury. They have a very thin wide receiver core of only inexperienced rookie players. Arcega Whiteside and Greg Ward being those two. Dallas Goedert will probably run the tight end position. And then you have Miles Sanders, the rookie running back. Again, this is a very inexperienced skill core for the Philadelphia Eagles, but they'll continue to get it done with Carson Wentz leading the way. Moving on, the Houston Texans, again, Ryan Tannehill, who's been fantastic over the last 7 weeks, should continue to be great. He has pretty much earned himself the starting job and a future contract with this organization because of his performances, and I expect him to have another good one. Unfortunately, a couple weeks back, they lost to the Houston Texans. If the Texans take their foot off the pedal and don't kill the Titans this week, they could eventually see them in the playoffs potentially. Moving on, we have the Detroit Lions. The Green Bay Packers offense, not really a pass-heavy offense, even though Aaron Rodgers eventually will have to and will be forced to in the playoffs throw the ball a lot. This week, probably not the case, but hopefully he can put something together. The Atlanta Falcons playing against Tampa Bay. Jameis Winston, sure, he's going to throw a couple interceptions, but after that, he'll get back on track. He'll have a pretty good game, in my opinion, against this Atlanta secondary, who's been honestly pretty beat up all season long, for the last 2 years, in fact. Then we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the opposite side of that. Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, been fantastic. Again, like we mentioned yesterday, Julio Jones has had 23 receptions in just the past 2 weeks. That is exactly what we want to see, and hopefully Matt Ryan will continue to improve. Austin Hooper looked good last week. This offense is getting better and better. Obviously, Devontae Freeman had a monster week. Then we'll have the Cincinnati Bengals. Baker Mayfield should be decent. Whenever we expect Baker Mayfield to be decent, he somehow is just average, right? But it's the last week of the season. Please put it all on the line and give us a good performance to at least be happy about. Otherwise, you're not being drafted in the top 24 next season. Moving on. The Washington Redskins, again, like I mentioned, Dak Prescott has been dealing with his shoulder injury. And I don't know exactly how much they want to throw the ball, but regardless, I think it's going to be a pretty easy matchup for them. I think Dak will probably throw similar amount of times that he threw last week. But hopefully they'll kind of limit him, and that's why his value is a little bit diminished going into week 17, because again, it'll be very easy for them to just win purely running the ball and playing defense, and that's what we're hoping to do so that they don't really hurt their quarterback of the future. If he ends up being the quarterback of the future, maybe they don't even re-sign him. I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they franchise tag him. We'll see. Moving on. Then obviously we have some of the tougher matchups. We don't want to really always play quarterbacks against San Francisco, but when it's Russell Wilson, it's a different scenario. Trubisky against the Vikings, that's tough. Kirk Cousins against the Bears, that matchup against one another. Kirk Cousins hasn't looked good in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if it's because of the fact that Dalvin Cook has been beat up and they haven't really established the run and been able to take care of or exploit defenses in the play-action game. Maybe that's been the issue, but as of late, he's just been a shell of himself comparatively to that streak that he had in the middle of the season. Then we have ourselves the Broncos and the Chargers. Broncos playing again. I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of AFC West teams. The Broncos, Chargers, and where are the Chiefs on this list? I'm actually curious. Then 20. Okay, cool. But either way, I'm kind of getting off track. We know that some of these defenses are really just strong, but at sometimes you're going to play your studs against these defenses. That's a given at this point. So there's no worry there. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings on the week, starting off with my top 12. Number one is Drew Brees. And let me tell you why. Drew Brees, without a doubt, has been absolutely incredible. What the heck just happened? Okay, never mind. Never mind. I saw something flash on my screen and I got a little worried. But Drew Brees has been absolutely incredible since returning. Obviously in that game against Atlanta in his first game back, against Arizona, he was perfectly fine. Then they went to a bye week, then went against Atlanta, and that was the worst game of the season. But since coming back from the thumb injury, he's had 6 3+ touchdown performances this season. That is insane. This is a guy that last season rarely threw the ball. They made it so where Drew Brees did not have to throw the ball very often because they ran that two-headed monster scheme. They fed the ball to Alvin Kamara, they fed the ball to Mark Ingram, and they dominated on the ground with their offensive line. This season, it's been a different story. It has been all about Drew Brees in the red zone and scoring consistently, being accurate, and being effective up and down the field, regardless of the matchup, regardless how many points they're up or down. He has been incredible, and it's a really nice sight to see. For a guy at his age, continuously producing and improving at the position, which is insane. But as of right now, they play against the Carolina Panthers. Last time he played against them, again, he threw a 3-touchdown game. Outside of the Atlanta matchup, that's the only team that has really forced Drew Brees to struggle this season. Every other team, he has really dominated in the last 8 weeks, and that's beautiful to see. So I think Drew Brees, again, coming off some incredible performances, they're going to continue to rack up the record for Michael Thomas. He should be good to go, and he's my number one going into week 17. Moving on to number 2, we have Patrick Mahomes. Again, he's on the thumbnail for a reason. Patrick Mahomes is one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League. Obviously, we want to see more and more games in which he's scoring 3 touchdowns, similar to last week. He did a little bit of the work on the ground, getting that rushing touchdown early in the game in the first quarter, and then we followed it up with a couple passing touchdowns there. It's exactly what we want to see, and hopefully we'll continue to see that as we get into the NFL NFL playoffs because, again, this Chiefs team is very good. They've had a very tough schedule in the second half of the season. A lot of good defenses they've come across. New England, Denver, Chicago in the last 3 weeks. Obviously, that's no joke. That is why we've seen a less productive Patrick Mahomes than we did last season. Obviously, the injuries made a huge difference this year. But again, going against the Los Angeles Chargers this week, I expect them to, without a doubt, win. It's a home game, and the Kansas City Chiefs should be good, and Patrick Mahomes should be able to produce this week. He's my number 2. Moving on, Ryan Tannehill. Like I mentioned earlier, Ryan Tannehill in the last couple weeks, or in the last 8 weeks, has been, where the heck is Tannehill on this list? It's insane how many points he's put up in 6-point per passing touchdown formats, yet he's not even close to some of these other guys. But again, he did have, 6 games off in the beginning of the season, and since then, he's just taken off. Again, the guy is a 2 to 3 touchdown play every single week. Literally every single week, he will score 2 minimum with the upside of 3 touchdowns, maybe even 4 touchdowns. That's incredible. Playing against Houston once again, a couple weeks back against Houston, he had himself a 3-touchdown game. Absolutely fantastic. We can potentially see that once again. If Derrick Henry is still dealing with an injury and might not play this week, we'll see Ryan Tannehill have to put the team on his back, similar to how we did last week against the New Orleans Saints defense. He threw 3 passing touchdowns, was very efficient. And to be honest, going into this week, there's not another one of these quarterbacks that I trust more than Tannehill. I mean, obviously Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees because they're studs, but Ryan Tannehill is really turning into one of those studs, and he has all the confidence to play this week. He's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Carson Wentz. Like I mentioned earlier, when you play against the New York Giants, it's too easy of a matchup. Carson Wentz has consistently been producing. He does not turn over the ball, and in the last couple of weeks, he's been far better than he was earlier in the season. But again, it has to do with matchups. When you play against Miami, the Giants, Washington, Dallas, and then the Giants once again, I mean, obviously you're going to throw or score 2+ touchdowns every single week, which that's what he's done. That's exciting. It's good to see. But again, we have to understand that there's always a potential. Carson Wentz shows up with 1 touchdown, but I mean, this is not the week for it. They're trying to clamp up and get a playoff, berth once again. Continue the streak of NFC East teams not being able to win consecutive divisions. They'll probably break, or they'll continue the streak as they'll stop the Cowboys from perhaps making the playoffs. But again, with a win here and a pretty big performance in my eyes coming in the direction of Carson Wentz, he should be a fantastic play. And yeah, should be good to go. Moving on. You know what's crazy? Before I finish, Carson Wentz has sneakily got himself in a very good position. He's the number 8 quarterback in 6-point per passing touchdown formats. That's insane. That says a lot about the National Football League, considering at times how consistent he has been, and the lack of passing yards and or rushing yards from his direction. He's been pretty inconsistent. A lot of 1-touchdown passing games. Yet still, he's atop of the board here. Moving on, we have number 5, Jameis Winston. Like I mentioned before, Jameis Winston is going to turn over the ball. He's going to get it out of his system. Then he's going to follow it up with a couple touchdown passes. He might break a record for the most interceptions thrown. I mean, he has 28 interceptions thrown this season. It is absolutely embarrassing, but at the same time, it doesn't really matter at this point. They still almost won that game against the Houston Texans. If he had not thrown as many interceptions, sure, they would have had a better opportunity, but that's just the volatility that you are going to get, and that's the risk versus reward situation with Jameis Winston. In the last 4 weeks, he's had 2 10-point performances and 2 40-point performances. Which one are we going to get against Atlanta? I'm hoping a 40-point performance, and I'm expecting that. But if, in fact, Atlanta shows up, gets 3 pick sixes, I'm not going to be surprised, and it's not going to really shake me from playing a guy like Jameis Winston. So I think as my number 5, I'm perfectly confident there. Moving on. Deshaun Watson's my number 6. Deshaun Watson, speaking of having a 10-point performance, he's still dealing with a little bit of an injury. Now, they're currently saying that he has a back injury, which remained him on the sideline on Thursday's practice. But the issue that I find is his ankle injury. I don't know for those of you who were watching the game last Saturday, but very often was he reaching for his ankle, grabbing for his heel, and the camera was specifically pointing it out when he was continuously nagging at that injury. I don't know what exactly his deal with it is. I don't know if it's an ankle injury. They say he has a back injury, but at this moment in time, it's pretty concerning. If the guy does not have the mobility to run the ball and have the full confidence to at least make plays with his legs or at least roll out of the pocket, he becomes a very one-dimensional quarterback. His value is throwing on the run, being able to get away from this offensive line that has fallen apart at times. And that's where he's been most effective, when he's outside of the pocket, being able to at least extend plays. But again, Deshaun Watson has a very good opportunity against the Tennessee Titans. He did scorch them a couple weeks back, and hopefully he'll do the same thing going into this week. Just got to turn, his turnover rate, it's got to go away, man. He's turning over the ball far too much, but young and inexperienced quarterbacks, that happens. Moving on. Josh Allen's my number 7. If he, in fact, plays this week, Josh Allen has been, he is the number 6 quarterback in fantasy right now. Obviously, the fact that he's ran 9 touchdowns and for 500 rushing yards and, throwing 20 touchdowns, that makes a huge difference. But he's been extremely consistent, even in the games in which we thought, there's no way that this guy's going to be able to produce. He still produces against Pittsburgh, still produces against the New England Patriots, even with the fact that Josh Allen has not thrown a 300-yard passing game in his NFL career yet. It does not matter. He scores touchdowns. He gets value from his legs, makes plays. Even with being, the last 2 weeks, he's pretty much a 50% passing completion percentage. That's terrible. But against good defenses like Pittsburgh and New England, we expected that. Yet he's still putting up fantasy points. This week against the Jets, I'm not really worried about the situation. I think he'll be perfectly fine. He hasn't played them since week 1. But I think Josh Allen's one of these better quarterbacks that is a must-start at this point, going into Week 17. Moving on, we have Jared Goff at number 8. Like I mentioned earlier, the Cardinals matchup, far too easy. Even if they don't play guys like Cooper Kupp or Todd Gurley, if Tyler Higbee's out there and Jared Goff's out there, I 100% want to play into this matchup because I truly do believe that the Cardinals defense, they cannot stop the quarterback position. They cannot stop the tight end position. And that combo is going to be deadly once again this week like it was a couple weeks back. Jared Goff, again, has turned his season around late. Maybe a little too late for people's comfort. But again, it's because of the fact that they're heavily throwing the ball and they're forcing Jared Goff to have to, win games. In weeks 10, 11, and 12, the guy had performances in fantasy less than 6 fantasy points 3 times in a row. That's terrible. But obviously in the last 4 weeks, 2 passing touchdowns per game minimum. So that's good to see. And I'm expecting him to perhaps have another good game here. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's close out today's video with the 9 through 16 rankings. Starting off with my number 9, Daniel Jones. Again, a lot of people have probably picked him up off the waivers, and I think he should be picked up off waivers and potentially played this week. Again, when you play against the defense like the Philadelphia Eagles, this is a defense that, again, has been torched multiple times. Last week, Dak Prescott could not get it done. But we see even before, the week before, Steven Sims Jr. and Terry McLaurin both had very good games against the secondary. They've given up a bunch of yards to an assortment of receiving cores, and I don't think Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Corey Latimer are going to fall over and not be able to produce this thing. I think Daniel Jones will be perfectly fine. He's my number 9. Moving on to number 10, Tom Brady, like I mentioned before. Earlier in the game, they're probably going to have an opportunity to get up early. Tom Brady will throw a couple of passing touchdowns, probably at least 2. One, I'm going to predict it right now. One passing touchdown goes to N'Keal Harry. The other one goes to James White. Okay, that's my prediction. Moving on. I do think Tom Brady, again, even though he is undervalued at times because this offense has been very stagnant, he will score touchdowns. He has passed the touchdown one at least minimum each of the last 5 games. That's good to see, but again, we want to see multiple touchdowns at least. The issue is if, in fact, this team runs the ball and his yard total is low, then we'll end up seeing a less of a Tom Brady. And it'll be like, 170 passing yards comparatively to some of these other guys that are going to be throwing for 300 plus in order to try to win a game that doesn't matter. It makes a pretty big difference. But hopefully Tom Brady can close it out with a pretty good, strong performance in Week 17. Moving on, we have Matt Ryan as my number 11, playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, another one of these offenses that is clicking late in the season and winning games that surprisingly make it, I don't know, it just makes it harder to understand just how the skill gap works, the skill disparity works in the National Football League. When we have a team like the Atlanta Falcons winning games against New Orleans, Carolina, the 49ers, and Jacksonville, where the heck are we seeing this from? Where is it coming from? But either way, They play against Tampa Bay. It is a very good defense, and they have forced Matt Ryan to struggle. Even in the past, in Week 12, they got after Matt Ryan. They sacked him a bunch. They made him turn over the ball, and it made it really difficult for him. But hopefully this week, if you're funneling targets to Julio Jones, he will get the job done, and he should be a pretty good play at the quarterback position. Here comes Matt Ryan. Moving on. Dak Prescott sits at my number 12 spot because I still do believe Dak Prescott's going to play, and he's going to play well. Comparatively to the guys below him, he's been a more consistent quarterback this season. Obviously, we'll talk about Russell Wilson and where he stands in my eyes, but in terms of what I trust the fact that at least the Dallas Cowboys are going to score a bunch of points, and that'll 100% start with Dak Prescott. All right, then after they, mount their lead, obviously we'll see a run-heavy Tony Pollard game. But prior to that, we'll probably see a couple passing touchdowns from a guy like Dak Prescott in an offense that sure has been running the ball a lot more in the red zone compared to the last season and getting Zeke a lot of touchdowns. But I think Dak Prescott will probably score himself a couple touchdowns this week and close out my top 12 rankings. Moving on to number 13, Baker Mayfield. Again, when you play Cincinnati, I mean, you cannot tell me that Ryan Fitzpatrick could show up and score 4 passing touchdowns against Cincinnati and Baker Mayfield cannot do the same with twice the talent at the wide receiver position, or even in the talent department surrounding him. I truly do think that Baker Mayfield's probably going to turn it on this week. Hopefully that's the case. Again, this is a guy that has been absolutely terrible this season in comparison to what everyone predicted. He's at least scored 2 touchdowns minimum each of the last 2 weeks in the passing game, which is fine considering they played against Arizona and Baltimore and got blown out both times. But this will probably be a closer matchup. A couple weeks back in Cincinnati, literally did nothing. Had 11 completions on 24 passing attempts, 0 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Had looked terrible. But hopefully maybe we can see a different Baker Mayfield show up at this game. If we don't, and he's dead to rights, then so be it. Moving on to number 14, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson scares me because he was so good this season. I mean, we talked about him every single week as a quarterback that we have to play. Yet he's become an every other week kind of quarterback. I mean, truly, he has become an every other week kind of guy. And when you go against the San Francisco 49ers in Week 17, in a game in which you really don't have any help at the running back position, sure, they signed a couple guys, but we haven't really established them. Travis Homer is going to be leading the backfield. And I do think that the inconsistencies of a Russell Wilson, the fact that he threw 50% passing completion percentage just last week against Arizona, if you have to take that kind of momentum into the San Francisco game and you can't instantly start up something and have some sort of momentum early in the game, they're going to shut you out and they're going to just make you look like a normal quarterback. And that's what I'm afraid of, and that's why I have my 14. Moving on to 15, Andy Dalton again. Andy Dalton's not afraid to throw interceptions, and he's not afraid to make plays. And I think the Cleveland Browns defense, they've been subject to a lot of, points in the last couple of weeks in terms of opposing offenses, and it's not really by accident. This defense has not looked good for majority of the season, and really in the secondary just haven't been up to par. I think Andy Dalton, with a combination of a Boyd, Erickson, Ross combo, obviously with their slew of tight ends, whatever, Eifert and Uzama and Joe Mixon. I think Andy Dalton's actually a sneaky good play this week at home against the Cleveland Browns. And it will close out today's list with my number 16, Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, again, in the last couple weeks has been, I don't even think you can qualify him as a quarterback. This past week, 0 passing touchdowns, 8.34 fantasy points, 26 for 40 passing. That doesn't look like Aaron Rodgers. The week before against Chicago, 16 for 33 passing, 203 passing yards and a touchdown. That doesn't look like Aaron Rodgers. Like having nearly a 50%, 60% passing completion percentage for an Aaron Rodgers kind of player just doesn't seem right. But that's the Aaron Rodgers we currently deal with. This week against Detroit, I do expect them to play very well, and I expect them to truly blow them out. But it starts with Aaron Rodgers, and hopefully he can score a couple touchdowns early in the game in the passing department in order to just kind of sit on that lead and just close it out strong this season. He's my number 16. All right, guys. Those are the last quarterback rankings, starter sits for the 2019 season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you have not yet already, again, click the like button. If you've made it this far, I do appreciate you watching the entirety of the video. Again, the fantasy season, even though it is coming to an end, The content is not stopping on this channel. We will continue to put out content going into 2020, early in the season, more videos even after the season ends, talking about the NFL playoffs, my predictions, how it's going to break down, some DFS and fantasy if you want to play daily fantasy for that, talking about that kind of jazz. But anyway, we'll keep you guys up to date on that. Don't forget, what was it? Sunday, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. For those of you obviously watching this, probably week 17 of need. So come by. We'll be live streaming then, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time Sunday morning. And we'll talk about everything. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.